the Crayons. I want to be a servant.
You're listening to Affirm Southern Gospel Radio.
Find your American Express card and start earning rewards with cashback and bonus points on your everyday purchases, like dining in or eating out, shopping at your favorite retail stores, or picking up groceries. You can earn rewards when you use Amex. See if you pre-qualify with no impact on your credit score. Learn more about our offers at americanexpress.com/check-4-offers. Your credit score may be impacted if you submit an application. Bye.
Sometime.
Denver, Dave. Started to
Night, life, hot. What a way you do. When life gets too busy, you for encouragement and spiritual refreshment. Remember that. When life gets to moving.
All right, it's time we get started this morning. Nice to see everybody out today. You know, I can only go by the comments that have been made to me this morning since you guys have come in the door that everyone is missing snow right now. Thought you guys would have been done with that. I really thought you guys were tired of snow by now. All right. I'm just trying to make sure you guys are paying attention. All right, let's go ahead and get settled in. We'll get Sunday school started here. You know, I won't mute. It doesn't work.
I'm trying.
Does not work. All right. Let's go ahead before we get into our lesson. Let's go ahead and go to prayer this morning. And anybody anywhere have a spoken request? Steve? All right. Ruby? All right. Somebody else? Yes.
Remember my cousin Errol Collins, he's in St. Mary's, and they're trying to wean him off the life support, but he's in really bad shape, so he really needs prayers.
All right. Done.
Please pray for Kurt and I as we travel. We will be leaving tomorrow for Maine, and we'll be gone for a few weeks.
You guys may see snow. All right. Donna.
Still remember my brothers that are lost and their families, and also Jamie called me before I left home and asked that we pray for her family as a whole, but also the little new grandson she has, it's 5 months old. That he has eczema real bad, and it's on his face and everywhere, but she said he was having a real bad time this morning, that's why she's not at church. She is babysitting him. So remember the little baby. And also she said pray that they would find something to help it, you know. So remember that. And I have a couple of unspoken.
All right. Somebody else?
Still remember Buddy and Georgia Freeman and her sister, our nation, our missionaries, our law enforcement, and Russia and Ukraine. And I still have 2 sisters that need prayer, and I have an unspoken
Somebody else? Mason?
Keep all our young people in your prayers, and again, just ask the churches to help you pray about the situation. God will benefit.
All right, I ask you guys remember to keep my brother Kevin in your prayers. He has his surgery this coming Friday. It'll just be an overnighter at Charlottesville, but if you would just keep him in your prayers. He's very anxious about it, so, and I understand. All right, anybody else with a spoken request? All right,
I wanted to ask for Randall, he called me also, he's got his stomach bug real bad this morning. Keep him in your prayers, and also my new grandbaby, great-grandbaby, she's so teeny, she has a preemie, but she's doing really well, mommy's doing good, and I just want to thank God for that beautiful little thing.
all right. I'm sure everyone has unspoken prayers. Let's stand up if you would, please. Brother Kirk, you mind leading us this morning?
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you again for allowing us another day to be
given us.
able to
Thank you, God, for allowing us to come in.
Thank you for all the love and the blessings that you bestow upon us.
We ask as always,
Thank
Father,
you for
you
keeping us
bless
safe
when we
through
sin
the
against you.
Bless
Forgive us when we
the
fail one
message
another so
that's
often.
going to be
We just
given
ask that
today.
you be with us throughout the Sunday school
We
hour,
pray that
the
you'll
service to
keep us all
follow.
safe and lead us and
That you
direct
would
us in whichever
and
way you
everything
want us
we
to
do,
go.
please
Lord,
in
we
your
ask this
sight.
in Jesus' name. Amen.
Answer all
Amen.
prayers. All right, I will ask, I know Bruce is not here this morning, but if anybody's got a verse or a passage you'd like to share with us? All right. All right, we're in a brand new book this week. The title of our lesson today is New Leadership, and we're going to be in 1 Samuel in the 16th chapter this morning. You know, I can only preach. I can only teach these lessons. Sometimes it feels like I'm preaching. With the way God leads me on these, and sometimes it seems a little unorthodox. I was reading this. You guys have to forgive me if this one kind of seems like it's out there, but this is just kind of the way I was led. You know, for several decades now, we have been convinced that the important people are the ones that look a certain way. You know what I'm talking about? The attractive people, you know, the ones that they got the right clothes, the right hair, an air of self-importance, and money. And that's all it takes to be important. And the example I want to use with this is, think about, and it's such a bizarre trend that we've had over the last, I'm going to say 30 years, 20, 30 years, and maybe it goes back farther than that, but that's when I started paying attention. Let's take Paris Hilton. Anybody remember who Paris Hilton was? Very famous, wasn't she? Why?
Famous or infamous?
I mean, what made her famous?
Wealth.
Okay, she had money, came from money. Looks.
Reality shows.
You know, she fit that mold of what I described as the important people, everything being based on the way you look and all this stuff, right? And just that whole lifestyle thing. But if you think about it, she didn't do anything. Did she? She was famous for doing nothing, right? She wasn't like some successful business person, right? I mean, she wasn't this big business leader. She was no rocket scientist. I think you could listen to her speak a few times and probably ascertain that. She didn't sing, she didn't dance, she didn't act, she was not a talent. She was just famous, right? All based on just the way she looked, the style, and all this stuff.
I think it was more due to her family than her.
Could be. But, you know, for a while there, she was all the rage, right? And then that kind of faded a little bit. And then came the Kardashians. Now, they got a lot of stuff in the background, but it's the same story for them if you think about it. And I'm not talking about mom and dad because they were their whole different and own set of weird. But I'm talking about the daughters, right? The girls. I mean, obviously they were pleasant to look at. They were beautiful women. And they fit that same mold. They had the looks, they had the air, they, set the styles and all this stuff. But what did they do? What made them so popular? What made them so important? Because they were important. That's all you saw when you turned on the TV. It was all about the Kardashians this, and you'd see videos and on Facebook and on all the social media. It's all about the Kardashians. You might argue that they really weren't important at all, but look at all the media attention they received. And again, were they singers, dancers, actors, rocket scientists, business people? They were famous for nothing, right? Just the looks, the outward stuff that you could see. There was literally a time when you could not turn on your TV without being bombarded with news of these people. Now, and there was all kinds of others just like them, but those are the ones that seem to be the most popular, the most famous, right? That's kind of how that started.
They're the most dysfunctional.
Oh, very dysfunctional. And maybe that's why we looked at them so bad. It's like, you know, you can't pass by a traffic accident without rubbernecking and seeing, you know, if you can see any of the gore and stuff that goes along with that. And, you know, that happens. But as far as I could tell, each of these people and people like that was in the spotlight for simply existing. I mean, right? They got more money. They came for money to begin with, but they got more money on just all the media interest in their lives, and even though they did nothing. They didn't contribute. It's not like we could look at them and say, look what they did for the advancement of the human race. Right? I mean, could anybody really argue that they did?
Set the human race back about 20
Maybe so. Now, you might say that all of this fame was all media manipulation, because we see that a lot in today's news, that the media sort of influences everything that we do. They present what they want us to see, we hear what the media wants us to hear, and that kind of stuff, and we're actually being manipulated by the media. And I think that that does happen to some point. But the real question is, who made them so famous? We did. Thank you. We did that. Now I'm not saying anybody in this room or you individually, but we as a population, this country, we made them famous. Their fame would have been far shorter lived if we weren't feeding it, right? Because the more attention we gave, then the media was more happy to, let's throw some more out there. If they're going to watch it, let's just keep throwing it out, right? It's like the more we were shown, the more we wanted. And again, this all has to do with looks, that outward appearance, right? And they didn't have to be able to actually do anything. So why did we make them so important? What was it about them or about us that gave them the spotlight? Just those looks. That's it. That's all they had to do to become famous, was look a certain way, right? Most of the time, you didn't even know if these people could even speak, because they didn't really talk. You just saw cameras following them around everywhere. I mean, did anybody actually hear an interview of these people saying anything of any importance?
Normally when they did, you did hear them speak, you didn't want to listen to them anyway.
Yeah. So, you know, their looks, what we could see with our eyes, is what drove that. Beautiful people living these lavish lifestyles, that's it. No substance, no talents, no achievements. It was all about how this appeared, the whole looks thing. Just looks. And I know that sounds kind of harsh. We couldn't possibly be that shallow, could we? Let me ask you this. So think about all the attention they got and all the media attention and people glued to their televisions, right? Have you ever glued yourself to your TV week after week watching the lifestyles of the poor and the ugly? No. It was all it was all about the looks, the appearance, all of this stuff, right?
I've got mirrors.
Don't need that TV, do you? Or, you know, how about you just, would we have gotten as interested in just watching plain old ordinary working person just trying to get by every day? No, we wouldn't have been interested. We're not going to watch that. We want the good-looking, vapid people over the ordinary working stiff any day, right? Because we base so much stuff on how we feel about other people based on how they appear, how they look, how they style themselves, how they dress, all this stuff. We make a lot of assumptions and a lot of judgments based on how people appear to us, how they seem to us. And we start placing value on that. We start placing importance on that over the really important stuff. That's the inside stuff, right? So here's a news flash. We all do that. We put value on people by how they look, not by what they do.
Mark, I shared something yesterday on my Facebook, and it goes right along with that. I don't know if anybody saw it. But it said, stop comparing yourself to others. Flowers are pretty, but so are sunsets, and they look nothing alike.
Yep. So what happens when the looks fade? Because they do. You know, after the looks fade, then that importance fades. So again, that shows you how much importance we place on the way people look, the way they appear over their substance, right? Aren't you glad that God doesn't value us based on our looks? But rather, what does he look at? What's in our hearts? And that's what our lesson is about today. We see people, God's people, getting what they want and then getting what God wants. All right, and it shows a clear difference on it. So all of this stuff that we talk about, you know, with the placing value and importance on the way a person looks, the way they appear, the way they seem. Even though I say this has been going on for the last few decades, this has been going on for thousands of years, right? Probably since the very beginning of mankind. So we're going to read a little lesson here about that. We'll talk about it as we read through the verses. This is all taken from 1 Samuel chapter 16, and we're reading verses 4 through 13. I'll read the first verse, and you guys read after me, and then we'll talk about them. It says in verse 4, "And Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming, and said, Comest thou peaceably?
And he said peaceably, I come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourself, and come with me to sacrifice. And he sacrificed Jess and his sons, and called them to sacrifice.
And it came to pass, when they were come, that he looked on Eliab, and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him.
But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord said not as man saith, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart.
Then Jesse called Abinadab, and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this.
Then Jesse made him pass by, and he said, Neither hath the Lord chosen this.
Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, The Lord hath not chosen these.
And Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, and he will not sit down till he cometh.
And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look at. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he.
And Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from the day of old. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah.
All right. So this week starts a new era in our study of God's people, right? So they have somehow managed, you know, the last couple of months we studied about the era of the judges, the period of the judges for Israel. And because that didn't always work out so well, you know, if you remember, God's people wanted a leader. They cried out, and God gave them judges. And some of the judges were very godly people. Some of them were very ungodly people. It was a roller coaster, what they had. So, they've survived a lot of bad judges, and they've come to a point where now they've called out to God and cried out to God, we want a king. We would like to have a king rule this nation of people. They wanted somebody that was strong, that could just set the rule and just lead them, and they'd be victorious in everything they did. So God listened to them, and he gave them a king. Now, the first king that he gave them, anybody remember his name? Saul. So we talk a little bit about him. Let's think about the very first thing, if anybody's done any study on this. What's the first thing that we noticed about Saul? How was he described? He was tall. He stood head and shoulders above everybody else. So right off the bat, God's people were basing, oh, here's a kingly guy, based on what? His looks. What did he? He looked like a king. He was tall. He stood up. He was a strong guy. He was a military kind of guy. He was a go-getter. He looked good. He looked like a king, right? And they were happy with that. At first, everything was great, right? Because Saul had been raised by Samuel, who was a man after God's own heart. Samuel was. When Saul was born, his mother gave him over to Samuel to raise, basically in the church. He was raised in church. He was raised a godly man. And so it looked like he was a great fit, the great person to be the king, right? And when Saul first started his reign over Israel, he was a godly leader. He listened to what God said. If God commanded this, and usually those messages came through Samuel, Saul did as God commanded him to do for a while, right? Then things started slipping. Saul came to this point that he thought he knew better than God. God's commands sometimes seem, especially when we go back and we read these Old Testament lessons, they seem a little harsh, don't they? This last group of people that they were going to battle against, I can't remember the name, who they were, but he had given Saul some pretty explicit instructions on how to handle them. What was Saul supposed to do? Kill them all. And what else was he supposed to kill? All their livestock, and don't take anything. All of it. Well, Saul knew best. So Saul, his men looted, spoiled, took stuff. They weren't supposed to do that. They brought livestock back with them. They weren't supposed to do that. And Saul spared the king that they were fighting. We'll give him a chance. That's not what God said to do. God said, do this, and Saul disobeyed. God looked at all this, and, people think that, well, God doesn't see this, or this is not a big deal. I don't have to do everything exactly to the letter what God said that I was supposed to do. I can sort of make the edges of this just a little fuzzy, and it'll be okay. God will be all right with it. God is not fooled. God is not happy with that. God prefers obedience, right? So he started regretting his decision that he put Saul in as king right off the bat. And God purposed that he was going to pull away from Saul and start looking for the next king, right? Now, keep in mind as this is going on that Saul is still sitting at the throne. He is in charge of the people of Israel. But God's done with him. God is not pleased with him, his disobedience. He's not following his commands. And he starts working with Samuel. And I'm trying to summarize the whole background to where we are right now. God let Samuel know that this was going on, and he sent Samuel on a mission to anoint the person who was going to replace Saul as the next king, right? Saul didn't know about it, right? Saul couldn't know about this. So Samuel had to sort of go in secret to do this. So God had told Samuel where to go. House of Jesse in Bethlehem, there's where you're going to find my chosen king. So Samuel goes under the guise of, we're going to do a sacrifice with this family and have a big feast and whatnot. So in verse 4, where we start our lesson this morning, we can see that Samuel did that which the Lord spake. You know what? If we, literally, when you think about just those few words, if we lived our lives like that, how much better off would we be? If we just simply did what God said to do, or conversely, didn't do what God said don't do, how much better things would go. Samuel, a godly man, he did as God told him to do, and he came to the town of Bethlehem. Now, this verse that we started at in verse 4, it says, "And the elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, 'Comest thou in peace?'" Anybody know why the elders would be trembling at Samuel's coming? They knew he was a man of God, but they knew that he's the right-hand man to the king, right? He is the advisor to the king. And their immediate thought was, this can't be good news. We're getting it's like the supervisor at your job or your boss, Kevin, I need to talk to you. You know, okay, this is not going to be good, right? I'm getting called to the office, not good. So they're worried, and they want to know, are you here on a peaceful mission? So he had asked them they asked him if he came in peace. And in verse 5, he says, "Peaceably. I am come to sacrifice unto the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, and come with me to the sacrifice." And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and called them to the sacrifice. What does sanctified mean? Just set apart. So he's there specifically for the house of David. That's who he's come to see. Or, I'm sorry, the house of Jesse, which, you know, David's father. So they didn't understand that the king didn't send Samuel. He's not there on a mission from Saul. He's there because God told him to come there. He's there by God's instruction. Again, Saul didn't even know he was there. So Samuel came to Bethlehem, specifically to the house of Jesse, under the guise of this sacrifice. God told him that his chosen person for king would come from the house of Jesse. So he had set aside just that family and their sons. How many sons were there altogether? 8 of them, right? Yeah. So he's got them aside, and he's called them to the sacrifice, and they're going to kind of have, you know, this sacrifice and a meal, a feast. So in verse 6 it says, "And it came to pass when they were come that he looked on Eliab and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him." Now think about this. As close as Samuel followed God, he's still a man, right? He did exactly like we would have done. Just exactly like we would have done. He sees this first son brought before him. Now there's a strapping man. That's the king. That's him. Got to be him. Man, this was easy. That was a quick job. As soon as Jesse started presenting his son, Samuel relied on that physical appearance to make his decision. This is the one that I've been sent to anoint. Now, we're not given a real description of what this Eliab looked like, but I can assume that Samuel looked at him and said, he looks like a king. He looks like he could be a replacement for the king. Probably a big strapping guy, whatever. And he was okay. He says right away, that's got to be the one. But what does God say about that? Let's look at the next verse, in verse 7. "But the Lord said unto Samuel, Look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart." So you can almost imagine God, when Samuel looks at him and looks at this first son and says, yep, that's the guy. We're going to anoint him. That's the next king. You can just imagine God just kind of looking down. Samuel, Samuel, Samuel. And I imagine he looks at all of us a lot the same way too. Mark, Mark, Mark. What are you doing? I'm sure that he does. And probably when he's really mad, he uses my middle name too, like your mom used to do. But God tells him, don't be concerned about the way this man looks on the outside. That's not how I do this. That's not how this goes. Don't look how tall he is. Don't look at that. This is not the guy. God that says very plainly, I do not look on the outward appearance, I look at what's in his heart. Wow, you mean something is more important than how a person looks? That goes so against what our culture is today, does it not? Because again, we place so much value on the beautiful, that whole appearance of, wow, they have it all. They've got this made. To God, that means nothing. Absolutely nothing. God only looks at what is in your heart. You know, you could almost, and you can look around our church, and I'm thankful for it. We don't all look the same. We don't all dress the same. We don't all act the same. But you know what? We can come here because we have one common thing in our hearts, right? And that's what pleases God. He doesn't care how we're dressed. He doesn't care none of that stuff. That's not important to God. He doesn't care about the outward. So Samuel got a little correction. You know, God's telling him, hey, no, don't do that. That's not what we're here for. That's not what we're going to base this on. So in the next 3 verses, 8, 9, and 10, this kind of goes on, the same process. Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this. And then Jesse made Shammah to pass by, and he said, neither hath the Lord chosen this. Again, Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel, and Samuel said unto Jesse, the Lord hath not chosen these. So one by one, all of Jesse's sons are called forward and passed before Samuel. First one, no. Second guy, no. All 7 of them, the ones that were present, all passed by. And with each one of those, God's response is the same. The Lord has not chosen these. You think Jesse's maybe a little concerned by this point now? Wow, these are my oldest sons. They're grown. They're, help around, whatever. They could all be king. Nope, that's not what God chose. So in verse 11, and Samuel said unto Jesse, are here all thy children? And he said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. Samuel takes his mission very seriously, and, he was there to do, under the guise of this sacrifice that they are going to do, but he knew that God had sent him to do a specific job, and he was not going to do anything else till that job was completed. He was bent on following what God had told him to do. God said, we're going to go do this. You're going to go and you're going to appoint the one that I chose to be the one to be the next king. Samuel knew from God's instructions that the chosen king would come from Jesse's house, so he asked. He's been through all these guys. God has said no to all of them. Got to be somebody else, right? So he asks Jesse, do you have any other kids? Do you have other sons? And Jesse told him that, yep, there is one more, the youngest, who was off tending to their sheep. So again, Samuel said, bring him here. We're not eating. We're not making a sacrifice until I've seen all of the boys, all of the sons, right? I say boys, but son. I've come to that point in life where anyone from 40 years and younger is a kid, okay? So they're all kids. So anyway, he's seen all these, but he knows that he has not seen the one that God said, that's the one. So he fetches him, and in verse 12 it says, and he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, and withal of a beautiful countenance, and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. So finally, this last young man was brought forward, and he's described as being ruddy. Anybody know what ruddy means as it's used here? means that he had a rosy, healthy appearance. Okay? A beautiful countenance, good to look at. Well, wait a minute. I thought this wasn't about looks. Right? Wait a minute. You mean we're picking this youngest kid because he's good looking? God told Samuel, we'll come back to that. God told Samuel, rise and anoint this one. This is the one that I choose. Right? And we can see in the last verse, in verse 12 or 13, then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. So Samuel, being obedient to God, he anointed David, just as God said, in front of his family, in front of his brothers, his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. Now, this is where our text ends this morning. That's the last verse we have. Did God choose David based on how he appeared?
No.
Why did he choose David?
He knew how his heart took on his heart.
You know, we see over and over David and we and the Jewish people place a great deal of importance on David, right? King David. Was he a perfect man? No, he wasn't. He made a lot of mistakes along the way. He did a lot of things wrong, pretty serious sins that we think are unforgivable things. You can't do that. You can't get away with that. How can you be a godly person and do that? It always reminds me of a meme I used to see on Facebook all the time. It'd say, don't judge me because I sin different from you. We have a bad habit of doing that one too, don't we? We like to say this person should be condemned because they did that. There's no way they could be a Christian. Oh, you better look in your own backyard a little bit. We can't be judging people on stuff like that. God will take care of that part. God chose David because what was in his heart, what kind of a person he was, not because of the way David looked. Now, David just happened to be a man who, as he's described later, was a man after God's own heart, right? God knew that. That was more important, who just happened to be a good-looking guy, as is described here. He wasn't picked for the job because he was good-looking. He just happened to be good-looking. God had already chosen who he was going to be Saul's successor to be the king. David wasn't perfect. But you know what? David always had a purpose in his heart. We see it all throughout Scripture. David was always seeking to please God. Now, again, did he stumble? Absolutely. All of us do. God knew that about him too. He knew that he would stumble. There were no perfect people. But God knew that he was a man who would always be looking out to him. So that's why God had chosen David. Just happened to be good looking. He didn't get picked because of that. We're very quick to judge, to value people based on their appearance, how they look. But here's something we have to consider. Think about all of the beautiful, my nose is itching. Where are all those beautiful people that I talked about earlier? Anybody see them in the news lately? Now that they're 20 years later, 20 years older, 30 years older, whatever the case is. Anybody seen Paris Hilton in the news lately?
Yeah.
Really?
She has 2 children.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful children.
Anybody see the Kardashian girls much in the news anymore?
Not as much as you used to.
No.
Yeah, it's almost something that's just totally gone. But you know, here's what's funny. Here we are, 3,500 years later, studying about this man who had set out after God. He was a man after God's own heart. We know what he was doing. It shows the difference. Where we put all of this importance on looks and appearance and all that stuff, God doesn't care one bit about any of that. Not a bit. But you know what is funny is the guy who was after God's own heart is the God that we're still reading and studying about today in our Bible lessons. That says a lot by how important is it that we are obedient to God. What is our heart trying to get us to do with God? Are we trying to follow him? Are we trying to please him? Or are we trying to please everybody else by how we dress, how we look, how we carry ourselves, how we do this and do that? Because it means very little in the end. What God is interested in is what in our hearts and what we do with him. All right? And that's the end of our lesson. I appreciate it, everybody.